As Christians, God commands us to be generous. In fact, the Bible says that God has given us money and our resources to enjoy life, but more importantly than that, to help those who are in need and to build God's kingdom. But I find that a lot of people have roadblocks that prevent them from being generous. And I want to look at three of the most common roadblocks with you. The first is the roadblock of selfishness. A lot of people aren't generous because they're selfish. We see a little picture of this in the story of Mark chapter 6, where Jesus feeds over 5,000 people. We're told that Jesus and his disciples, they had been teaching, they had been busy all day, and so they tried to get away from the crowds, but the crowds followed them. And so when the crowds followed them, Jesus, he began to teach them some more until eventually it was like dinner time, and his disciples were like, hey, send these people away. There's nothing we can do for them. They need to go and find their own dinner. And the disciples in that moment, they're being kind of selfish. They were thinking, I'm sure, about how tired they were, how hungry and thirsty they were. They just wanted to rest, and I can resonate with them. But Jesus, it says, looked at the disciples, but he looked at the crowds and he had compassion on them. He had compassion because he says they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so what did Jesus do? He provided for them. I'm sure Jesus was tired and hungry, but he took the meager stuff that the people had and he turned it into a meal for all those people. Jesus wasn't focused on his needs. He was focused on the needs of others. And we need to overcome the selfishness too. And selfishness is a real problem because it gets in the way of our generosity. I remember one time, some years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was going to go on a mission trip with his family, but he pulled out at the last minute, and he said, yeah, I just can't afford to go. He says, I can't afford to do it this year because I really want to take another cruise with my wife this year, and we just spent $600 on our dog. And I remember thinking like, oh my word, why would you spend so much money on your dog and a cruise when you could go on a trip to help people? And it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I have to be honest, I can't blame my friend too much because I deal with a selfishness problem too. We all do. But we need to get the focus off ourselves and we need to put it onto others. And then we'll find that we can overcome one of the most common roadblocks to generosity. Roadblock number 2 is the roadblock of cynicism. A lot of us aren't generous because we look at people on the side of the road who are begging, and we look at poor people and we think, man, they're just trying to take advantage of me. They're just trying to make an easy buck. They don't want to work. They don't want to use the system. And there might be some truth in that, but you have to be careful because cynicism is going to rob you of a generous heart. I remember that story in Luke chapter 17 when Jesus heals 10 lepers. After he heals the lepers, only one of them comes back to thank him. Only one guy, 90%, never even thanked Jesus from saving them from being outcasts and from saving them from a horrible death. And I remember thinking when I've read that, I think, man, if I was Jesus, I would have been done healing people. That would have been the last time I ever heal anybody. If they're not going to be grateful, then I'm not going to waste the time. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was not a cynical person. He was willing to help people, even if it just seemed like they just wanted a handout. Now, I know there's a reason we're cynical. I've helped people before. I remember one time taking gifts to a family that was supposed to be in real need around Christmas time. We brought the Christmas gifts for the kids, and we pulled up to their house, and it was like a mini mansion. And so maybe they didn't have any cash for whatever reason, but I just remember feeling really weird about it. It's like this didn't seem like people who were really deeply impoverished. But when I look at Jesus, he didn't allow cynicism to grow in his heart. He wasn't a pushover, but I think he allowed people to take advantage of him so he could help those who were really in need. And so I hope you understand that you can really help people in need. Don't be cynical. I'm not saying that you should always just give cash to everyone who asks for it, but don't be cynical. Be generous. If you can either be generous or cynical, fault on the side of generosity. Let's look at the last roadblock. Roadblock number 3, the roadblock of distance. Many of us live lives that are quite separate from people who are in real poverty. Most of us don't know what it's like to be really hungry, or we don't know what it's like to not know where you're going to sleep tomorrow night. We haven't been in that position. And so to understand the situation of real poverty, we need to close that gap. We need to close the distance. You know, Jesus, he went out and he was with people. I mean, he came to this earth. He impoverished himself to come to this earth, and he went out to the people, to their needs. When Jesus healed people, he reached out and he touched them to show compassion for them. And so you and I, we need to close the gap. We need to close the distance that separates us from people who are in need. I challenge you to go on a mission trip. You know, nothing changed my life more than going overseas, going to Indonesia, going to a majority world country for the first time and looking at real poverty. If you can't do that, serve in the inner city close to you. Serve among those in need in your community. Get educated. Learn what real poverty is and learn what you can do to help it. Overcome the roadblock of distance. Because Jesus, he overcame all these roadblocks in order to help you, and he wants you to do the same to help those who are truly in need.